Hey, what's going on, everybody? We are back live after a month and a half hiatus. We figured, hey, let's do a live. There's not really anything to talk about, so we're just gonna wing it tonight. See what I don't know. We could talk about the weather, the songbirds outside, or we could talk about the joint committee meeting that took place on Wednesday. Uh, so we'll go with that set of songbirds. We have a special guest joining us tonight. We want to welcome Elliot Hubbard. Elliot, how you doing?
Good yourself.
Doing good, doing good. Thanks for coming on. If you could, real quick, Elliot, you're a familiar face. If anybody's on social media and follows deer hunting pages, Elliot's kind of all over the place. But Elliot, if you could just give everybody a brief synopsis of who you are and what you do.
My name's Elliot Hubbard. Live in southeast Tuscola County, in between two small towns of Kingston and Silverwood. Professional railroader by trade. Hobby farmer, small town farmer. I also do food plot installations and stuff like that. Been active in the regulatory side of things, especially for deer since 2013. Kind of hit it hard and heavy with the APR crowd for a while there. Michigan deer hunter, let them go, let them grow. And then around 2016, 2017, I was a part of the Thumb APR proposal for the Thumb 5. And then after that, I've kind of hybridized myself, gearing more towards the betterment of the resource versus one specific side of things.
Excellent. Well, yeah, again, thanks for coming on tonight. And I know, Elliot, I've seen you on quite a bit of the habitat pages, and Jordan has raved about your property there. So yeah, it's glad to have you on. So
It's
on Wednesday, joint committee meeting with the House of Representatives, Ted Nugent showed up, and there was some consternation about the DNR and the NRC specifically. So we kind of want to deep dive into that, and we'll just kind of kick it off. So the overall theme was the overreach and weaponization of the Department of Natural Resources, really going too far in a lot of the testimony of what people thought they should have been. So again, different representatives shared their testimony. You had Ted Nugent there, and then you had some other folks from around the state. So if we could, whoever wants to kind of kick it off, guys, what was your initial reaction um, to what you saw?
to me is a circus show. A lot of podium pounding, a lot of blow hard. I mean, there are some factual points that were made to a degree in the past. In my opinion, there has been some overreach, and I'm not one of those guys that falls into mean green jeans, right? It's no different than people going, "Oh, the black guns are scary." Are there some problem people in the department, past and present? Absolutely, but to label them as all overreach, um, I wouldn't say so, because the other aspect of it too is, yes, we voted on Proposal G, and Proposal G gives the NRC the ability to make the rules and regulations, not the DNR. The DNR is strictly an advisory role to the NRC. But that being said, if there was this gross overreach of power, why haven't our legislators done anything? Because up until as of recent, the House and the Senate have been under Republican control, and nothing has been done. All of a sudden, right this moment, in a budgetary cycle, because particular individuals in legislatures got their hands slapped for things, now it becomes this big ordeal. I mean, when Nugent, Jordan, you might know the exact year it happened, when Nugent came and talked about the whole baiting and feeding thing to the committee, slamming his hand on the fist, screaming, yelling, hooting and hollering, and nothing was done. There was no follow through. People talked about it for about 2-3 weeks, and it fell flat on its face. And that's the problem that I have in this situation here, is they are representing all of these issues or overreach, yet I know quite a few COs. I've had quite a few interactions with COs. I know of some people that had some negative interactions, but for me personally, I've had nothing but positive interactions with COs. But I also do my due diligence to learn the rules and the regulations, and if I have questions, I'm going to ask people. I've even called my attorney up and said, "Hey, I don't understand this rule. Can you help me out with it?" He may take a couple days to get back with me, but yeah, this is what the law says. Cool. Do your due diligence, and usually you won't run into any kind of problem. If you do have interactions, if you treat them with calm, respectful tone, you're going to get usually the same back. Again, I understand there's some bad apples out there, but the song and dance that was portrayed is just egregious. I mean, in all reality, they're talking about all these pig farmers. Well, I know, and Jordan knows who I'm talking about, a particular person who is involved in the agricultural sector that is very, very well in the know with legislatures, well in the know of the hows and the whys. There was no agricultural pig farmers around. The farmers that they were portraying were the handful of breeders that breed these boars, these Eurasian feral hogs, and sell them to the high fence places. Those were the guys that were upset. Those are the guys that have been in a lawsuit since 2011. And if I'm not mistaken, Ted's part of that as well, because, well, Ted has a high fence operation that also had Russian boar. So when you start following the money,
some of them are sows.
Yeah. Well, either way, so like let's dive deeper into that pig situation too, right? So when you're looking at pigs, you have your white meat pigs, which are your domesticated pigs, but there is the red meat side of it, which has the Eurasian pig lineage, which people reference as the Russian boar, Russian pig. If you look at what that line is doing down south on an agricultural sector, if one pregnant sow was to get loose in the state of Michigan and had her piglets, we're in trouble. Like there's no going back with that, right? We had back in, I believe it's 2010 or 2011, around the Crump area, there was pigs that got loose of the Eurasian lineage, and it took everything that those farmers in the DNR could do to kill and trap all of those pigs out, and it took some time, and there was a lot of damage done to the crop fields. There's an economic side of things that a handful of people want their way to shoot these pigs in a pay-to-hunt, but don't realize that the risk economically would be in the billions of dollars.
Right, and you see that with places down south. You see that in Texas, and all these crazy videos online on YouTube, and guys blowing away pigs from helicopters and all kinds of insanity, because that's the level that the issue has gotten to. And I can only imagine the good folks down in the great state of Texas love them some pork and some barbecue. So you ain't got to tell them twice to shoot a pig, and they still can't shoot enough of them.
If, like, you look at your neck of the woods there, Jordan, the UP, Tim, even same with you being up in Sheboygan County, with those swamps in the terrain, if a sounder got established, you'll never kill them all off. You cannot get into the bowels of those swamps and those ridges and valleys, even with dogs, and eradicate them. And the other aspect of it, and Jordan and I have had this conversation, people can say, "Oh, well, we got the wolves in the UP." The wolves ain't going to do anything to them pigs. I mean, you look at in Europe where these pigs come from, you're talking brown bears struggling, a 2,000 to 2,500 pound bear struggling to kill an adult pig. So people are like, well, fine. Well, they'll go after the piglets. Well, the problem with the sounder is if a pack of wolves comes after piglets in the sounder, them pigs are going to turn on those wolves and defend those piglets with ferocity. And I don't know if there's an animal in North America that's tougher than a pig.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. We're kind of diving right into it, but hopefully anybody that's watching tonight, you had a chance to watch the meeting from the other day, because if not, you're probably wondering why we're talking about pigs right now. But that was a big part of the committee hearing. I think one thing for sure that was lacking was the other side of the story. And Elliot, you're doing a good job of painting that picture of why there was so much discussion around pigs and everything. And it was presented as the DNR's out to destroy businesses. Um, so you're painting a very good picture too, Elliot, of the other side of that, um, the damage that could possibly take place if these high fenced operations aren't managed correctly. Um, Jordan, your initial reaction to the meeting?
Well, you know me, Tim. I'm going to give it to you straight. 100 proof truth comes out of my mouth all the time. So I guess not unlike Ted, that would make me a somewhat polarizing figure to some folks. But, anybody who's known me any length of time, they don't have to question where I stand on a given issue. I'm pretty clear. And I'm going to do the same here today. So I think it's important to ask questions about this situation that unfolded in the House with the three subcommittees. And I want to take a second to point out the subcommittees that were involved were, number one, appropriations, which is chaired by Representative Borton, weaponization of state government, which is chaired by Representative Regas, and then the House Natural Resources and Tourism Subcommittee, chaired by Representative Martin. Those were the three subcommittees in question that were engaged in this hearing. Now, when you hear the word hearing, at least in my mind, it's an immediate connotation connected to a courtroom. And when you think about a court hearing, the first thing that I think is it's an opportunity for both sides of an argument to make their case to the judge. Opening arguments, right? Put it on the table. What are your grievances? Okay, we've heard you. What's your counter? What's your rebuttal? The problem with this air quotes hearing is, from my perspective, it wasn't much of a hearing at all. In fact, it was kangaroo court. And I say that because there was nobody who testified with an opposing point of view. There were no DNR staff that were present to defend themselves or rebuff any of the allegations that were made against them. It was a stacked deck of individuals who had both prior legal entanglement with the department, as well as, quite frankly, a relatively poor disposition towards the department for varying reasons. And I think that's bad business. The optics of that do not look good. It does not look fair. It does not look just. It paints a picture of intent. And I'm not saying it was or it wasn't. All I'm saying is it looks bad. And I listened to the whole thing. I listened to better than an hour and a half of dialogue, several speakers, and bluntly stated, the common theme was that the DNR is a tyrannical organization that is the enemy of the people of the state of Michigan. And honestly, I find that to be a pretty horrific allegation. I was disappointed. And, I wrote an op-ed about all this, and I got into some nuts and bolts in it, right? But when I look at how things unfolded, it's the how that matters. It's how people conducted themselves. It's how they presented themselves. Because you got to remember, this is the House of Representatives. This is the people's house, as it's called. And it should be afforded a certain reverence, a certain decorum, a certain sanctity, because it's the people's house. And I don't personally feel that turning the people's house into a celebrity circus for what appeared to be retribution against the DNR is a favorable look. I'll hand off from there for a moment.
The one thing off of that, Jordan, is, you heard one of the representatives say how they have this list of people that have all these grievances of overreach. Well, in my opinion, Ted doesn't represent the average Joe Michigan hunter. He cashed out on Michigan years ago when he moved to Texas. He essentially said, peace, deuce, whatever, and in my opinion, he doesn't really represent. If there's this list of people, then why not bring those people in to share their grievances? Why didn't we hear from the average Joe Hunter who has these real world experiences? Because we're not celebrities, therefore we don't hold a place, in that chamber with that representation. I think that's where the ball is being missed. Is there was no average person in there in that chamber talking about it. It was Ted.
Well, and to piggyback on that, Elliot, if indeed the allegations made against the DNR are accurate, and this tyrannical agency is so rampant in their overreach, you would think they would have had no problem filling up a testimony list out the door and around the corner by the way they described it. I mean, you take snippets of dialogue, and Ted talked about, everywhere I go, people stop me and they tell me all about their run-ins with the DNR and the wrong done to them. And I'm paraphrasing. That's roughly what he said. Where were these people? And, another representative at a later point referred to the fact that he had all these people that spoke to him and reported abuses of authority and overreach and all these things, but they were terrified to come into the house and offer their testimony for fear of retribution from the DNR. I don't know. That smells like a rat to me.
Well, according to what he had said too, he supposedly had one that was going to step forward, and there was threats of a warrant being issued for this guy's arrest because he was coming forward.
See, and here's the problem that I have with that. So I have a law enforcement background. I personally know Chief Haynes. I know the tight ship that Chief Haynes runs, and I know for a fact that there is no way in the world that Chief Haynes would allow a warrant to be issued for somebody's arrest on some BS because they were going to testify against the DNR. That is one thing that man holds highly, is integrity. And that's the kind of thing that really irritates me with this, is you are essentially bad-mouthing a law enforcement division ran by a guy who doesn't allow that, and you don't even know him. You're literally trash talking somebody without even knowing their character, and I have a problem with that, just on a personal level.
I agree.
Yeah, and I think when you look back at
that's my problem with the whole thing. I'm sorry, Tim. That's my problem with the whole thing, is there weren't specifics given. It wasn't Chief so-and-so did and said this on these dates and these times, and these are the examples of abuse of authority, and these are the examples of corruption, and that wasn't provided. It was very broad brush, very ambiguous language that basically implicated the entire DNR, whether you're Director Bowen, whether you're Chief Haynes, or whether you're John Smith, the brand new biologist for ants or whatever. One end of the organization, all levels to the other. They're all evil. They're all corrupt. They're all bad. That's ridiculous. And Ted wants to use the words insanity. Well, that's insanity. That was ridiculous. And I know Ted has a penchant for being fiery and expressing himself in eccentric fashion. But, we got to be factual, and we got to have integrity with the things that we say. And when we go into the people's house and we're conducting business in official capacity on live stream television, we got to do better.
Yeah, one thing I was going to chime in is when you look at the language used, there's a lot of derogatory language used. The DNR being called immoral. It was even stated they're the enemy of conservation. The DNR and NRC are the enemy of conservation in Michigan. At one point, there was a DNR official, officially insane or something along those lines. But it was just one thing after another. And when you talk about specifics, as we already discussed, you had several different high fence operations or pig breeders. That seemed to be the vast majority of the testimony in front of us and in front of the committee. You had the representatives themselves speaking. Ken Borton talking about, getting in trouble for baiting with his bird feeder, which coincidentally, if you watch the snowman cam, I see a whole lot of shelled corn going out there, not a whole lot of birdseed. But anyways, and that's from 2010. Anyways, that particular instance is from 2010. We had instances brought up from 2002 and 2012. I know the gentleman and the undercover operation. I think that was from 3 years ago, 4 years ago, but it didn't appear to be anything current or relevant. There was a lot of old things. Ted Nugent talked about the game show wardens after he says half of the people that come up to him, he specifically said half of the people that come up to him tell them horrific stories about the Michigan DNR and their, overreach of power, and then proceeded to talk about an episode of Wardens, and use that as an example. Now, again, not to say to Elliot's point earlier, there are bad apples. There's bad apples in every type of job that there is, and there are bad CEOs out there. But to Jordan's point too, is it fair to now take a broad brush and paint the entire department as immoral, inept, corrupt, all those strong words? I don't feel that was fair myself. Take it away, whoever.
Here's a little truth bomb that people probably aren't going to really want to accept, but recently the DNR tried to fill, or is actively trying to fill, the lead survey biologist Chad Stewart's old position. You want to know how many internal biologists applied for that job? 0, because they didn't want to deal with the Michigan hunter. They didn't want to deal with the Michigan deer hunter throwing a fit, acting childish, throwing temper tantrums. That position is, you couldn't pay me enough to do that position. So if we want to sit here and call the DNR immoral and, poor in conservation, our rules and regulations are set because so many people cried about this, that, or another that has turned into an absolute disaster. We're no longer managing our deer herd for the best of the resource. We're trying to manage it for the deer hunter, and we've turned this into a circus act. And we need to start getting back to that aspect of managing it for the resource, not managing it for the hunter.
And I guess to that point, I wanted to bring up some of the things that Ted said, because there was one representative at one point, she keyed up her mic and she asked Ted what his suggestions were. And Ted made 3 comments there. The first one was he wanted to extend hunting season to September and then out to February. The next was he wanted to see fistfuls of doe tags handed out to whoever wants them. There's some places that have a longer season than we do, but I'll tell you this. We have a very long, very liberal season with a quite a hefty bag limit overall for most of the state of Michigan. I'm not sure that tacking on September and February is going to make a biological difference. I don't think it will. Do I have any data to support that statement? No, it's my personal opinion. But moving on to, free doe tags for everybody. It's like a bad episode of Oprah. You get a doe tag, and you get a doe tag, and you get a doe tag. We do have an antlerless issue. We have a deer density issue. We have crop damage issues in some sectors of the state. There's no denying that. But here's my beef. When you give something away for free, okay, meaning it has no value, it's worthless. I'm not sure that that's the message that we want to send about antlerless deer in the state of Michigan, that they have no value, that they're worthless, that they're rats to be exterminated. I think that could be the beginnings of something that we don't want to open up. So when I heard that, I kind of cringed and I'm like, oh man. Myself, I believe every deer, every animal has a value, whether it has headgear, whether it doesn't. And if I harvest a doe, I am just as thankful for that doe as I am for the buck. And there's somebody out there right now saying, oh, yeah, whatever. We know you celebrate the 10-pointer more than the doe. You know what? Maybe I do, but it doesn't make me less thankful for that meat in my family freezer when I harvest a doe. It means something to me. It has value to me. And I would never want that population to be negatively impacted by bad policy. And that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, I think he stated in it was Macomb, Wayne, and what other county down there? Was it Washtenaw?
Wayne, Oakland.
Dead deer.
Yeah.
Dead deer every 50 feet driving down the highway. I've been down there a few times recently, and I don't think I've experienced that. There's definitely a lot more dead deer along the road than what I experience up my way. But you know, Robert and I were having a conversation the other night, and we were talking about the $5 doe tags because, you know, antlerless harvest is a big point of contention here on the state of Michigan. We want to balance out the herd, and you know, we're going from $5 doe tags to free toe tags. But you know, when you slap a $5 fee on these doe tags, Robert and I got to talking about it, and we looked at the old DMU 452, the TB area. You've been able to get a over-the-counter $5 doe tag for quite some time. So these counties are Alcona, Alpena, Iosco, Montmorency, Oscoda, and Presque Isle. So through our conversation, I just started looking at the harvest reporting for last year, and with the $5 doe tag, which I heard somewhere else would be the cure-all to actually balance out the herd. $5 doe tag, Alcona County, $2,300 to 1,950 does harvested last year. Alpena County, 2,300 antlered deer to 2,000 antlerless. Iosco County, 1,600 to 1,300, so more bucks than does. Montmorency was 1,401 to 1,401, so dead even there. Then we have Oscoda. It was 1,096 to 1,194, so 100 more does taken in that county. And Presque Isle, 2,200 to 1,600. So to Elliot's point, he was talking about the mentality of the Michigan hunter. A $5 doe tag, a free doe tag, is it truly going to make a difference? We've extended seasons. We've offered, you know, we've got muzzle loader where you can take out any type of weapon, and it just doesn't seem that anything is working there as far as taking doe. So I don't know if throwing out a free doe tag is going to do anything. And then the other side of that too is we want to paint a broad brush. This is how you fix the problem: free doe tags. What about hunter access in that portion of the state? That's a huge problem down there. You can hand out all the free doe tags you want. Our hunters going to be able to access the land to harvest the animals?
Well, and you know, immediately to that point, you're talking Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb, which Ted highlighted for deer density and car deer incidents and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to tell you right now, there's plenty of municipalities within that metropolitan area that want absolutely nothing to do with hunters coming in there killing deer, whether it's a USDA sharpshooter who's a trained designated marksman, or whether that's Jordan Hoover with bow and arrow. They don't want it.
That's a fact, and that's the problem with those large suburban areas. Is there's so many townships that have ordinances against it. There's cities that have ordinances against hunting. So they're overrun by deer because there is no true ability to hunt deer. I mean, my wife lived in Meridian Township, Okemos area, and if you had 5 acres or more, you could archery hunt, but that's one of the few areas in a suburban area that allows you to actually be able to hunt deer or anything with, you know, there was a representative in that committee, I can't remember his name, that stated that the DNR and their rules and regulations have pushed hunters away and not allowing new hunters to come in because it's so, restrictive this or that. And it's like, to Jordan's point, on a deer hunting side of things, we have 10 universal doe tags. We have a combination license that setup's been in place since I can remember. I can take the universal tags and take them wherever, because beforehand, if people remember, if you bought a private land tag, you could only shoot that deer on the parcel that you bought that tag for, where now I can go and fill those tags. Then there's DMAPs. You can apply for DMAPs and get even more tags. So season starts October 1st and then goes all the way for late antlerless to the second Saturday in January. And then in areas that have the urban archery hunt, you're going all the way January 31st. So I don't get this. Get where we're making it so hard for people to get into it. What's changed is more people have kids in travel ball or travel sports. You have side-by-sides, you have campers. People are doing more activities and they're just not in the woods. They're not getting their kids involved because they got this sport or that sport or this or that going on. To the other aspect of it is the DNR doesn't make the rules. We the people voted Proposal G in that placed that power into the NRC. The only thing that the DNR makes rules and regulations on is the crop damage permits and the stuff outside of season. Other than that, they have no authority and is purely the NRC. And, Ted brought up, deer season starts September 1st. I can tell you right now that man does not shoot deer in the summertime under crop damage permits, because anybody who takes crop damage deer understands how miserable it is in that heat. And September 1st, even in Michigan, it's hot and it's miserable.
I think that Ted, despite, and I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, and I'll say despite his good intentions, made it abundantly clear very quickly through his comments about regulations and the department that he is very disconnected from the realities of the management initiatives that the department has undertaken, the things that they've tried to do for a very, very long time. Free doe tags. Well, great. We've tried everything under the sun. We've got early season, we've got late season, we've got extended season, we got urban season, we got $5 doe tags, we got DMAP, we got crop damage, there's tons of options. So I fail to see how making more of something available that people are not using is then going to make them use it.
Well, if you remember in the CWD zone, when we first had it, when Meridian Township and the epicenter first had it, they were handing out free doe tags and then didn't do anything. Until you restrict the buck or the opportunity at a buck, things are never going to change. I hate to say that, but so many people I've seen on social media and heard, I got my meat buck, so now I'm going to chase after, my big boy, right? Well, that spike or 4-point eats just as good as any kind of doe out there, And if that spike or that 4-point made you happy and that's what you wanted to shoot, that's fantastic. But it does bother me when people go, well, it's meat in the freezer, I got my meat buck, when we're literally target-rich environment for the most part of southern lower. There's areas in the northern lower that have it. You get some of the areas in the northwest 13, like around Manistee, Cadillac area, the Lake Charlevoix area. You don't have the deer densities like that. You can just go out and shoot 10 does a piece. But for the most part, there is nowhere in this state that making a doe is going to be detrimental. So why are we not using doe meat and only stuck on buck meat?
One of the things that really galled me with Ted as well, and this speaks back to my perception about what a hearing should be and fairness and equity in that process, due diligence. When Ted was introduced by, I think it was Representative Martin, I could be wrong, one of the representatives, he was introduced as avid Michigan outdoorsman Ted Nugent. But he knew nothing about regulatory change, nothing about current policy. He was completely in the dark. I mean, it was really ridiculous to make that statement because we all know Ted lives in Texas. He doesn't live here. And I'm going to take a stab at this here. Ted probably doesn't fly up from Texas for the joy of hunting Michigan public land every fall. Just a guess. That being said, love it or hate it, Ted was there in the position he was, described by the legislature as representing Michigan sportsmen. I've just got a problem with that. I do, because Ted Nugent is.
I totally agree with that, Jordan. Because, I mean, like I've always followed him. You know, I mean, he is an icon in the outdoors. There's no doubt about that. But in the same hand, he moved away how many years ago? And like you said, he doesn't come back here and he doesn't jump on some state land with the rest of us. No, he goes down to Jackson County, hunts in his little private property where he's got abundant deer. He doesn't see the normal everyday sportsman out doing their thing because he's not that. He's either hunting his ranch here in Michigan or he's hunting his ranch in Texas. So for him to think that he's speaking for the whole state as a whole as sportsmen, to me is totally wrong. Like, honestly, I lost respect for the man over that. Like, it just rubbed me raw. Like, in the way he would go from literally one subject to the next, and it wasn't just a subtle, okay, well, now we've talked about this, let's talk about this. No, it was like, oh, let's swing way to the left, and okay, now let's swing way to the right. There was no in between. Like, it was a total clown show. Like, to me, the guy made a fool of himself.
Well, you got to remember what Ted Nugent is. And I'm not saying this disrespectfully. It's just a matter of fact. Ted Nugent is an entertainer.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he does. And if you watch that hearing, what I saw was an entertainer on a stage. And I'll give you a case in point. I've been in those House and Senate subcommittee meetings. And when I sit down at the table, might I add, dressed properly for the venue, but that's another point. When I sit down at the table and I set up to the microphone to speak, I'm looking at the representatives and senators, etc., whom I'm addressing. Ted Nugent didn't sit down at the table. Ted Nugent was spinning around, literally playing to the crowd, working up the crowd. You know, the one thing that sticks out of my mind, he says, and this is funny. And he's waving his arms and he's turning around to the crowd. This is funny. You're going to like this. This is funny. It was entertainment. If you're there for the right reasons, you're not turned around working the crowd. You're speaking to the people you came there to see. And that was really what ground my gears. That is a place to handle the people's business. It's not a place for a celebrity circus.
You know, Robert, going off of your point, at one point, I think Ted did represent the average Michigan hunter. You know, back in the day, the Fred Bear era, right? He did represent the average Michigan guy. But if you watch his shows at all, and you'll see he's hunting in Michigan, and here's this big, 8-point with the white horns over his big giant bait pile. That's because it's in this high fence facility that he has on his property in Jackson. That's not what we all do. Yeah, I have my own private land. I've managed my farm to the best of my abilities, but I still go pound public land. I still go chase turkeys on public land. I still go after deer on public land. I rabbit hunt on public land. I squirrel hunt on public land. Am I the representative of all Michigan hunters? No, but I am one of those Michigan hunters. And that's what I wish I would have I would have rather seen the average Joe Hunter speak and give testimony over the celebrity poop show that we seen.
So, I think at this point in the discussion, I mean, we've definitely brought up the shortfalls and the discrepancies and, our discontent with how things were handled or conducted or things that were said. But going forward from this point, I guess I'd like to focus on the questions that this leaves hanging out there. And question number one, in my mind, what was this meant to accomplish? What was the intent of the representatives? Obviously, we know Ted was there to entertain and to do Ted Nugent things, and he did that. But the representatives had to have known, like I said earlier, Ted's a very polarizing figure. There's not a whole lot of people in the middle ground with Ted Nugent that say, yeah, well, Ted's okay. It's usually a love-hate relationship. That's just how Ted is. And I respect that. But bringing that into the formal political setting, into the people's house, conducting formal business, inviting that in there, knowing the potential for fallout, knowing the potential for negative, knowing the potential for 50% of viewers are going to be PO'd. It just doesn't seem like a shrewd political maneuver to me. It seems like a stunt. And I don't understand why you would do that, right? And I'm going to pick on Republicans for just a second here, and I don't want this to turn into Democrats versus Republicans, because I think we should definitely maintain that natural resources are an apolitical issue. But here's the bottom line. The conservative crowd loves to stand on the rock of integrity and due process and all those sorts of things. And I don't think that that's how that hearing transpired. I don't think it was fair. I don't think it was equitable. I didn't see due process. I saw a lynch mob. There was a narrative. And to me, it began to feel much more like personal retribution than the people's business. So the question then becomes, now that we've fired the bullet that we can't put back in the gun, what now? These legislators have cast a very bright light on alleged issues of abuse and corruption and tyranny and all these sorts of buzzwords within the department. And now that they've cast that bright light, they're obligated to the people that they serve, to their constituents, to produce a solution. What's that solution? I didn't hear any solutions even proposed or kicked around the room, brainstorm style. I didn't hear any of that.
No, you're absolutely right, Jordan. There was no solution presented, just strictly problems and who the problems come from. So I guess, yeah, where do we start? Number one, we need to get educated. I've had this conversation with Jordan and Robert, a couple other guys on the team. I'm not going to lie, I've been very guilty of burying my head in the sand for a very long time as a Michigan hunter. I have a responsibility as a hunter in the state of Michigan, as an outdoorsman, uh, to understand how this process works and to involve myself in this process. Out of ignorance, lack of not wanting to be responsible, I chose not to educate myself for the longest time. I was of the same court of our DNR is terrible. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to manage it. It was all their fault. They took the fall for everything. Now that I have started to have a better understanding of how everything works here in the state of Michigan, I understand that not everything is the DNR's fault. It's not any one entity's fault. Number one, the blame lays on me for not raising my voice, for not being involved. And that's a tough pill to swallow. You know, it's easier to blame somebody else than to stand there and say, I screwed up. I'm part of the problem. I need to fix that. So, where I'm going with this is, as an outdoorsman in the state of Michigan, whether you love deer hunting, whether you love waterfowl, you enjoy fishing the trout streams in Michigan, you're an upland bird hunter, it's your responsibility to understand how it all works, how the resources that go into it get to where they're at or don't, and have your voice be heard.
There's three responsible parties in this situation that we face: the DNR, the NRC, and the Michigan hunter. And one thing that is blatantly obvious and crystal clear in my eyes is the lack of unity in the hunters. We all want our own way, and we will fight each other tooth and nail while everything is a dumpster fire. The coyote situation is a prime example. The antis are well organized, well funded, and they came in it very precise. And hunters are scattering, trying to figure out what to do, and they're fighting amongst themselves, trying to figure out what to do. And that's the problem that I see in this is this riled the hornet's nest up, but there's no unity. I seen in a comment, what do we do to fix this? Well, until the Michigan hunter decides to put their own egos and personal wants aside and do what's best for the resource and unite with everybody else and be one voice, nothing's ever going to change. I've been to countless NRC meetings. It's the same people over and over again, myself included, that's at the meetings. Until recently, there is a younger crowd of guys that are very passionate about hunting that have started to show up at these meetings. And I love seeing that younger crowd starting to show up. It's what we need. But we as hunters need to hold ourselves accountable for our own actions or lack of actions in this process.
I think you're definitely onto something there, but I want to zoom the camera out a little bit, proverbially speaking, because I think the division and the fracture and the lack of unity reaches far beyond the Michigan hunter. You've got Michigan hunters who are all arguing different things for regulations, for bag limits, for seasons, for bucks, for does, for private, for public, for whatever. You've got stakeholder groups doing the same thing, which doesn't align with the rank and file public land hunter most of the time. Everyone has their own ideas. Then you've got the legislature crafting proposals and recommendations to enact regulatory change. Well, then you got the Natural Resources Commission, who's crafting language and making proposals and trying to institute change. And then on top of that, you have all this drama, all this finger pointing, all this trying to pee on somebody's shoes. It's juvenile and it is ridiculous. So the lack of unity goes much deeper than just Michigan hunters. We have all these organizations, all these agencies, all these institutions, and nobody's working together. That's the core of the issue. And that's one of the things that I'm going to bring to the table when I have conversations in days to come with some of these legislators, is I'm going to propose the idea of a first of its kind natural resources summit. I'd like DNR brass from the director all the way down to the department chiefs. I'd like the entire Natural Resources Commission, any representative, any senator who wants to be a part of the conversation, some stakeholder group leaders, some well-known and respected independent, at-large folks in Michigan who bring things to the table for natural resources. Get everybody in the same room and talk about this and find a way forward. Because if there was ever an example of self-destruction, we are it. And it lives and it dies all around one thing. We don't have this interagency, interinstitution, interhunter collaboration, communication, and partnership. Everybody is running in opposite directions, independent of one another. And until we can get everybody around one table, we're dead. And it all begins with basic, simple, open, respectful discourse. And I'll even say passionate debate, because you know what? Passionate disagreement, passionate, respectful debate is the bedrock of liberty that birthed this country.
Yeah, very well said, Jordan. Robert, did you want to chime in?
No, I'm good on that. I think between Elliot and Jordan, they've covered pretty well everything I was going to speak on.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
I think too, oftentimes it's easy to get passionate about whatever your discipline is. I know guys that are passionate trout fishermen. I know guys that are passionate grouse hunters. I know guys that are passionate deer hunters. Everybody has that extra bit of enthusiasm for whatever it is their specialty is. And that's great. And sometimes it's easy to get lost in that passion. And I once knew a person that said it this way: sometimes you stand too close to the forest to be able to see the trees. And I think right now, in the wake of this absolute dumpster fire of a hearing, is a great time to take a breath, to step back, to be introspective, and to evaluate how we're going to move forward in a constructive rather than destructive manner. How we're going to work together and not against, regardless of party, regardless of stakeholder group affiliation. There's got to be common ground. I know there's common ground. We found it before. And it's just a very important point right now for Michigan outdoor issues that we all sit up and we take notice of what happened and we learn from this. Because you know what? These representatives they're human beings. They're not perfect. Just the way I'm not perfect or you're not perfect. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to screw up. They're going to say dumb stuff. We all do. Now that mistakes have been made, it's what we learn from it, and it's how we treat each other, how we interact, and how we work together moving forward that will define whether we succeed or fail.
Something that I asked my representative and got crickets on, and this is something that I would love a lot of people to start asking their representatives. If the NRC is as bad as it is, why hasn't any legislation been pushed forward to reform the NRC? Not eliminate, but reform the NRC in a manner in which there are specific requirements to be on the commission. You could ban political buddies from the governor and have a check and balance system with it, because as of right now, the sole decision maker of adding or removing somebody from the NRC is the governor. The governor is the sole person. It doesn't have to go through any vetting process, technically. And they might be a fisherman, they might be a hunter, they might be both. So if this was such a big deal, why hasn't our representatives or senators created a bill that created a requirement of what it takes to be on the commission? I got no answer from my representative. And I guarantee most people who ask their reps or their senators will get the exact same thing. So if this is such a big deal, then why haven't they done anything about it?
Yeah, that's a good point. And unfortunately, I think you saw it play out a little bit on Wednesday. There's a lot of personal feelings and personal grudges involved, and perhaps that gets in the way of conducting business and making progress and moving forward. But that's a great point, Elliot. One thing too, I don't want to kind of regress backwards in the conversation, but going through the theatrics of how everything was presented on Wednesday, there was some valid points brought up too. Some very good things that should be discussed. When we do talk about accountability, there are some things that definitely leave us scratching our heads. Ted brought up baiting. We've heard him bring up baiting before, and we've talked about it here on this podcast. What is the difference from the apple that falls underneath the apple tree and is picked up and moved? That does not make sense. The baiting there, and I'm sure it can be debated there. He brought up, I'd like to know where the spending. Where's Doge on that? I think some accountability with the budget. What's the money being spent on? Let's see some transparency there. I felt
Can I
that
dive
was
into
a
that real
fair
quick,
point
Tim?
also. Oh, sure, go ahead.
Every single representative and senator in this state can FOIA and have that information at their desk within hours, free of charge. So if our representatives and senators really wanted to know how the DNR was spending their money, it's at their disposal whenever they want. You and I are going to have a hard time FOIAing that because it's going to take money and time. But people need to understand that these same representatives have that information at their disposal fairly easy and are not doing anything.
Yeah. Do you think maybe there's something a little more to that?
Well, here's the thing. Who sets the budget for the DNR? The DNR does not set their own budget. Our representatives and Senate are who set the budget. Now, how the DNR use that money is a little bit different, but end of the day, the budget is set by our representatives, not by the DNR.
And I just want to add on here too, we've kind of been a little bit hard on the representatives and a little bit hard on Ted. And, in the name of fairness, which I brought up right early on in the podcast, and I think it's important, let's talk about the other side. Let's acknowledge that, yes, the DNR is imperfect. Yes, the DNR at various points has screwed up, has done things that are wrong, has said things that are wrong, has made mistakes. Fact. Let's acknowledge the fact that every once in a while, maybe there's a DNR CO who's a bad apple, not unlike many other law enforcement agencies around the country. They're not exempt. And I don't want to sound like a DNR bootlicker here, but we can't dehumanize the air quotes DNR as being some evil empire, corrupt green machine of death. They're not. They're people. They're human beings, and they're fallible the same as we are. And I'll tell you what, I would have hell to pay if people judged me by the mistakes that I made 10, 15, 20 years ago and held me to it today. I would never recover. Because I too have made mistakes. I too have said stupid things. I too have done stupid things. And I'm thankful that, people don't hang that over my head to this day. But yet that's exactly what we're going to do to the DNR. And to make matters worse, we're not even necessarily holding them accountable for their behavior today. We're holding Bob accountable for Ryan's behavior 20 years ago. How unfair is that? What if we were judged by our predecessors? It's the sins of the father argument, right? So I think we got to take a step back and we've got to be introspective. We've got to look at this. And yes, there are problems. Yes, there are things to be improved upon. But you know what? There's a way to address these problems. And there's a right way and there's a wrong way. And I think the way that it was gone about in that hearing was the wrong way. It wasn't positive. It wasn't constructive. No policy came out of it. No resolution came out of it. So what benefit was it? And that's what we got to do now is, what do we do now that we've screwed up? And acknowledge, yes, fiduciary responsibility is paramount, not just with the DNR, but with any state or federal agency, period. I want to see fiduciary responsibility. I want to see integrity. I want to see accountability. I want to see transparency across government agencies, including the Department of Natural Resources. I'm absolutely in agreement. But I think we can handle it better than we did.
Right. And yeah, you really drove home the point that I was thinking as you were talking. We got to do it the right way. We talk about attendance at the NRC meetings and it's low. And that's our opportunity to go about it the right way, to have our voice heard, to let them know what changes we're looking for and how we want to go about things. And, we talk about Ted being absent. He's down in Texas and, he drove up here or flew up here more than likely and was at that meeting Wednesday. But imagine if Ted announced he was going to show up to one of the NRC meetings. I have a feeling attendance would boom at that particular meeting, and a lot of people would have a lot of things to say, and that's the right place and the right time to do that. Wednesday just did not feel like the right time and right place, and I feel there were some points that were probably pretty solid that fell to the wayside amongst a few, including us here, um, with the delivery of the message and the unnecessary derogatory delivery of it.
You
Yeah.
know, not unlike the Natural Resources Commission, who has published points of contact, email addresses, phone numbers, all that kind of stuff, and of course the monthly meeting. Our elected representatives and our senators also have publicly available emails and phone numbers. So I guess I'm just going to throw this out there. There's more to being an air quotes avid Michigan outdoorsman than simply donning your camo and strolling off into the woods opening morning. And we've covered that in previous podcasts. We've talked about the need for more engagement in commission meetings and in policy and in habitat improvement and the multifaceted aspects of stewardship. But the political level, and I know people don't like it, right? There's a lot of good country folks that say, man, you know, I don't want to talk politics. I don't want to be involved in politics. I don't like it. I get it. Oh, do I get it? But here's the thing. We have to engage with our representatives. If our representation doesn't hear from us, are you going to be represented at the table when they're talking? My guess is not. So it's our own fault, again, to some extent, when we see a representative or a senator step out and say something and we're like, whoa, where did that come from? Well, when's the last time you called your rep? When's the last time you called your senator? Wrote an email, wrote a letter? Have you ever? There's no time like the present to make better choices moving forward. And political engagement is just part of the process.
Amen. Amen. Very well said. And I think we'll end on that note tonight, gentlemen. Very good conversation. We want to hear back from you. If you guys have comments, drop them below, whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook. Let us hear your thoughts on the meeting, on how you feel it went on Wednesday. And yeah, Elliot, we want to thank you again for joining us tonight. It was a pleasure talking with you. You brought a lot of insight and great things to the table today.
I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, we'll definitely have you on again. Robert, Jordan, we're not going to take another month and a half off, we promise. We will be back very soon with another Michigan Outdoors Report Live. Thanks again for watching, everybody, tonight, and we will check you all later.